From the beautiful Finger Lakes region of upstate New York, this is the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. We take questions from anyone in the dental profession and discuss what it takes to win not only in dentistry, but in life. Business, leadership, relationships, parenting, health and wellness, money management, nothing is off limits on the Dental Lighthouse Podcast. I'm Jason Tenori, your host, and have over 20 years of experience to pull from. Learn from my mistakes and let me help you collapse time so you can become the best version of yourself. Yo, what is up? Dr. Jason here, Dental Lighthouse Podcast. Today we have another one of those fancy crossover episodes, and I was blessed to be interviewed by Dr. Paul Etchison. Paul is a really, really good friend of mine and has a phenomenal podcast, one that I am hoping to one day emulate, called the Dental Heroes Podcast. Really, really good content, great guests, and he's just a great clinician. He's a great mentor and coach, and he's been there for me Paul and I have known each other almost 10 years. So it was a pleasure to be on his podcast. We talked about a lot of different things, everything from personal and professional development, accountability, leadership, how to have uncomfortable conversations with team members. And at the end of the day, how all of this, even though we're not driven by money, how all of this ultimately leads to more revenue, more profitability, and more fulfillment. So I'm excited to share this episode with you guys. Check out his podcast, Dental Heroes Podcast, a really great resource. And let's talk soon.
Has a team member ever come to you with a complaint about another team member that you felt like they should really be addressing it with that person rather than you? Now, as owners and managers of people, we all wish that our teams could just work out conflict on their own with each other directly, but so often that's just not the case. Today, we're going to teach you how honing in on this skill with your team will lead directly to more profit in your practice and a higher take-home pay for you as the owner. And our guest in this interview is going to explain exactly how he did this in his 7 practices so that he could reap all the benefits of having a self-managing team. You're not going to want to miss it. You are listening to Dental Practice Heroes, where we teach you how to build a scalable practice, make more money, and take more time off. I'm Dr. Paul Etchison, author of 2 books on dental practice management, dental coach, and owner of a group practice collecting over $6 million in the south suburbs of Chicago. I want to teach you how to grow and systematize your dental practice so you can spend less time practicing and more time doing whatever it is that you love. Let's get started. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Dental Practice Heroes. Got a really great guest today. It's his 3rd time on. Every single time was a absolute showstopper. Someone who I very much admire, a mentor of mine, owner of 7 practices in New York State, the podcast host and founder of Dental Lighthouse Podcast, and just an awesome all-around dude. Welcome back to the podcast, Dr. Jason Tenori. What's up, bud?
Not much, brother. I really appreciate you having me back on, and I love just connecting with you, and I'm excited about the conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to have him on because he is sometimes guilty of not texting me back when I text him. He says it's a Droid to iPhone conversion, so we'll let him off. I think,
for whatever reason, they never go through. I get that little, did not go through. I'm like, he must be blocking me. Am I blocked? Has Etch blocked me?
No, never. You're on my emergency list that if you call me at any hour, it just rings, even if it's on silent. So Jason's got an awesome story, someone who has grown a big flagship practice, went to multiple practice, and somebody who's pulled himself out clinically, just recently completely pulled himself out clinically, but went down to 2 days a week for a very long time. And just stepping back and stepping into the CEO owner role, and just someone I admire for just getting themselves out of the clinic and just ultimate systems. I mean, this is the systems guy. So if anyone's never heard of you, Jason, what would you say if you could give a brief story of your practice ownership journey?
Yeah, so it certainly won't take 3 minutes, but I started a practice from scratch over 20 years ago and just screwed it up like we all do and learned from my mistakes and slowly but surely grew it. And a few years later, next thing you knew, we were bringing on an associate and then we were running out of space. So the first 10 years was really just growing the flagship office or growing our only office. got it to what it is now, which is about 18 ops. A lot of doctors and hygienists running in there. It does a decent amount of revenue every month. And at that point, started to get the itch of multiple practice ownership. So we did some research as to where were we pulling all of these patients to come to our flagship, and looked at different communities and started offices in those communities and almost cannibalized the flagship intentionally. So these practices were all de novo practices, but we knew we'd have a pretty decent patient base right away based on where we were drawn from. And then just did that every year or two, started another practice, and here we are. We have 7 locations, full service lab, about 150 employees. And to your point from a few minutes ago, I've slowly but surely worked myself out of clinical practice. I spent a lot of time mentoring our younger docs, running meetings, sitting in on leadership meetings, and just trying to solve big problems that face the organization and just keep plugging along day after day.
So why would you, just curious where this decision came from? What about putting like satellite practices that were already around where you had existing patients versus putting somewhere at taking a second location that's completely independent of your flagship?
The reality is, who knows, right? I woke up one day and I was like, I think it'd be a good idea to put a practice here, put a practice there. Like I wasn't doing all the things that I know you're supposed to do when it comes to like demographic research and stuff like that. Part of me just felt these patients are driving 45 minutes to come see us and our flagship is busting at the seams. What if I put a practice there and we lost 10% of our patient base in the flagship, but instead they went over here? It would free up the flagship and it would be a more predictable de novo. Luckily, that's in fact what happened. We came out of the gates on these smaller practices doing $50,000, $60,000 a month from the get-go, as opposed to what most people really struggle from the get-go, and they're just trying to get 10, 12 grand in revenue the first couple months. So that's the main reason that we did it. But the reality is I have no idea if that was the right business decision or not. But I probably have made a lot of really bad decisions, but I just keep working really, really hard and just keep trying things, and it ultimately just works out for me. So I'm sure there was a lot of that in play too.
Yeah, that's interesting to say because everyone's like, what is the right way to do this? And sometimes I think the right way is just to do something and figure it out when you get there and just adjust and pivot course if you need to be. Now, it sounds like it was a capacity issue at your flagship that kind of spawned, let's open some satellite locations. What was the decision process doing that versus maybe getting out of some insurance carriers or something like that?
The reality is I kind of woke up one day when we decided to open up these other locations, and I just felt like bored's not the right word, or unfulfilled's not the right word, but I just felt like I could do more. How can I influence more people? How can I impact more people? So the idea of expanding, the idea of opening up new offices would allow me to really influence more team members, more patients, more communities. That's really driven me. I love getting out of bed now. I just got done with running quarterly meetings this past week, and I just love seeing these people and how they're trying to just become the best versions of themselves and really influence the patient base and the community. And that's what gets me fired up. That's what fills up my cup. And don't get me wrong, there's days where I'm like, why the hell am I doing this? I really struggle on certain days, but 90% of the time I feel so good about what we're trying to do and the direction that we're going in.
Yeah. What was like some lessons that you learned from going from one to the first 2 or 3 practices? What changed for you when you now had to manage multiple locations?
You referenced that I'm a systems guy, and I do hang my hat on systems for sure. But in retrospect, the one thing that really kind of pushed us through those hard times was leadership development, was being able to grow people, grow leaders, being able to over communicate. So offices could run how I wanted them to run when I wasn't going to be present in the building. And office managers and regional managers and operations people were basically saying the same thing that I would have said if I were there. And that just comes through repetition. It comes through making sure that there's tons of clarity on the direction that we're going and everyone understands exactly how we're going to get there. And it may sound soft, and especially for some of your younger listeners, and I used to feel this way too, core values and mission, that's all bull, and let's just prep teeth and let's just get revenue up. But the reality is the bigger that we got, core values became even more and more important, and clarity of vision and mission became even more and more important. And over communication, one-on-ones, having accountability conversations. That is what drives everything. And again, I used to think it was this implant system or this way to give anesthetic. That'll really separate me. And what's really separated us is just our ability to just communicate the vision and live by our core values and hire based on core values. And the rest kind of takes care of itself.
You talked about developing leaders. And I think there's this myth that my office is running really crappy. I just want to find an experienced office manager. I'm going to pay them a lot. They're going to come in here and they got office management experience, so they're going to know what to do. And then they get there, and the fact is they just really lack any sort of leadership skills. I know you mentioned setting the example and repetition, but how do you develop leaders that can lead and manage when you're not there?
Me being a systems guy and starting the practice based on systems and operations and stuff like that, I was running into the obstacle of leadership development. So I took a deep dive into reading as many leadership books as I could and going to CE classes and webinars and stuff based on leadership. And I just basically developed my own, let's call it leadership curriculum, where I really wanted to try to take the ambiguity away from leadership. Because you could read 10 leadership books, each one being different, and you really maybe even be more confused after you were done reading them because they all take you in different directions. So I kind of set out with this goal of operationalizing leadership. Like, these are the steps. This is what you do, making it as black and white as possible. And over time, I've developed that program and we use it in our own leadership development. I do quite a bit of coaching and I use it with those dentists and those office managers and those operation people. So office managers have to wear multiple hats. They have to wear the task manager hat, right? Fill the schedule, present treatment, accounts receivable, and insurance verification, all this stuff. And I feel like those are tasks that if you find someone that can do those things well, that's great. There's a lot of people out there that can do those things well. But when dentists want their office manager to also wear the leadership hat, that's where the wheels start to come off, right? Because those office managers were never trained on how to set expectations, how to onboard, how to have uncomfortable conversations, how to have weekly or monthly one-on-ones, how to set up, how to just do all of these things, right? And I think dentists, and I'm very guilty of this and have been for the first 10 years of my career. You just want to put someone in that office manager seat and you think to yourself, okay, they'll take care of it. They'll do it. I'm too busy looking for MB2 on this molar, or I have to go prep this veneer case. I trust Susie, my office manager, to have those uncomfortable conversations. And sometimes Susie can have it, but I can assure you that it's a lot easier for Susie to have it if she's been trained up on how to do it. And if she hasn't been trained up, what I often hear from docs that I coach is, well, my office manager is passive aggressive or she comes off really rough. Well, it could be that the reason she's acting like that is because she has no idea what she's doing. And no one's really coached her up on how to have these leadership conversations. And that's where I really like to grow people, really like to grow leaders in my own organization and other organizations and give them these tools that I think make that part of being a leader a little bit easier.
I know what you mean about all the different resources and books because I'm reading John Maxwell's new book. It's like Heroic Leadership or something like that. And a lot of it's about staying true to your core values. And it talks about how divided America is and stuff. So it's a little timely. But it's interesting. It's like the same things over and over again. But then when I look back at my leadership journey, what I realize is that I've had a lot of really crappy conversations with people. And then after I have them, I'm like, why did that go so poorly? And more times than not, it's when I'm letting my brain tell the story of what I think happened in my perspective and not looking at the other person's perspective. And that's the best way I could say having difficult conversations. It's always respecting the other person's perspective. Do you have anything that you would say if you had to put like one leadership principle or one thing that makes somebody really special that doesn't come naturally, but you develop in your leaders? If you could think of one thing, what would that be?
And the only reason I'm thinking what I'm thinking is because, like I said, just came off a bunch of quarterly meetings and a lot of the conversation was about this one idea. So I get coached. I think everyone should have a coach. I get coached. And recently my coach has brought this idea of there's basically two rules in life. The first rule is all people are inherently good. So if we're talking to our teams, let's say you have 10 or 12 people in a room during a staff meeting, I would roll out these rules, right? I would say, here's the deal. everyone in this room is inherently good. And if they're not good, then that's my fault as the leader for even allowing them to stay here. So basically we're saying we're all good core value fits. We all want to do the right thing. We all want to row the boat in the same direction. None of us come to work thinking, how can I screw up Dr. Etch's day? Like, how can I figure out a way to manipulate the situation so that assistant is miserable? How can I not turn over that room intentionally so that my hygienist gets pissed at me? Like, no one's thinking that. So everybody ultimately wants to do a great job. So that's the first rule. So if we believe in the first rule, then the second rule is all errors are simply errors in understanding. And if we believe in those two rules, then, and we also give each other permission to have conversations, then everything is on the table. So a great example is an assistant comes to the front desk and gives a really poor handoff. They're rushed. There's no introduction. The router's not filled out correctly. And then they run back to the room. And then the treatment coordinator is kind of looking at it like, wow, I'm so confused here. I don't know what to do. So that happens almost all the time in a dental practice. And I know you can speak to that, right? The next step is really where the magic happens. So there's really two options. The TC forgets about it. They sweep it under the rug, or they don't have the courage to go to that assistant and have a conversation, what we call peer-to-peer accountability. That's one option. Or the TC, when there's a little bit of downtime, maybe just before we go to lunch or just before the end of the day, can go to that dental assistant because that dental assistant has given permission to have peer-to-peer accountability conversations and basically say, hey, Mary, that handoff that you gave me about an hour ago, it was all over the place. It was rushed. I didn't know who I was talking to. And to be honest with you, the patient left without scheduling. She left confused. I'm still confused. Help me understand what exactly happened there, because if we continue to do handoffs like that, it's just not going to be good for anybody. It's just not in line with what we're trying to do here. We use the phrase with empathy and curiosity. So if you're going to go to someone and have a peer-to-peer accountability conversation, it has to be from a position of empathy and curiosity. So you're not being like, you did this. You're asking questions. You know, what happened there? Like, help me understand why you did the handoff that way. Because we've agreed on what the ideal handoff is. We had some training on that. And if you missed that day, or if you need help on what's the ideal handoff, then let's have that conversation. But if we continue to do handoffs like you did, like, we're not going to keep the schedule full. Patients are going to leave confused. So let's unpack this a little bit. And again, if you've given each other permission to have these conversations and you're coming at it from a position of empathy and curiosity, then it just leads to great conversations. Well, I didn't know what an ideal handoff was, or I'm rushed in the back and I had to hurry it up. Well, let's unpack that. Why were you rushed in the back? Did I schedule you incorrectly? Or let's unpack that. And if you can get people having these peer-to-peer accountability conversations, these minute meetings, you call them anything you want. We call them into the storm meetings. Man, it's amazing how much stuff gets rectified without people like me and you having to get involved, right? Because there's a lot of what we call triangular accountability. So that TC is going to go to you and be like, Etch, you got to go talk to that assistant because she's been giving me horrible handoffs. And then you go to that assistant and you're like, hey, I've been told, someone let me know that you've been giving bad handoffs. So then the assistant's like, who told you that? Give me an example of that. Like, when did that happen? Also, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, Edge, because you lead a perfect organization. No. But like this whole triangular accountability, it's just filled with friction. It's slow. It doesn't work. So we're really trying to double down on empowering each other to have these peer-to-peer accountability conversations, again, from a position of grace and curiosity. And it's finally starting to catch on. The first level of it was our leaders having it with each other. That's been awesome. And now we're just trying to trickle it down through the rest of the organization. Like, we're all here for the right reason. We're all good people. We're all trying to row the boat in the right direction. Like, if we don't have these conversations, then it's really unfair to each other because you want to know if you're winning, right? You want to know if you're doing a good job. If nobody goes to you and tells you, then you don't know. Am I doing a good job? Am I winning? Am I doing my job well? Like, someone needs to let them know.
You mentioned that your leaders have it. How did you take it from the leaders down to peer to peer? How did you get the team on board with this? Because I can tell you from my experience, man, we have had this conversation so many times at our practice, because the thing is when you have that triangular conversation, it never goes well. And it's always, I didn't do that. No, it's just like, it drives me crazy when I have an associate come tell my assistant lead that they need to talk to a different assistant about getting the apex on the x-ray. And it's like, you were right. You were there. You were right there when the x-ray was taken. All you had to say is, let's retake this. And then in the hallway say, hey, you know what, if you don't have the apex, just take it again. And now we got to go through this like thing where like, oh, now they're tattling and all this. I'm going to take full accountability. I have not figured this one out, how to get people to communicate peer to peer, but damn, do I want it. So help me out.
Oh, no, it solves so many problems, right?
Yeah.
No, first off, it comes with repetition. It comes from the leaders modeling the behavior. But there's a couple of things that we try to tell we'll call them frontline employees about how important it is, right? Tell your associate and your assistant about how important it is. So the first thing is kind of to echo what I said a few minutes ago is like, we all want to we call it winning, right? And we have definitions for winning, and I won't bore you with that, but let's just agree that we all want to win. So if that's the goal, if we see someone that's acting in a way or behaving in a way that's not in line with winning, then we've all given each other permission to have these peer-to-peer, into the storm, moment-to-moment conversations. So what you just alluded to is a great example. This assistant's routinely taking x-rays that miss the apex, right? Let's just unpack that particular situation. The associate has to be trained up to go to the assistant from a position of, again, empathy and curiosity and say, hey, Mary, a couple of things after the appointment, not in front of the patient, obviously, but Mary, a couple of things like when we're doing endo, it's imperative for you to make sure that you're taking the x-ray where I can see the apex. And I've noticed that the last couple of times you haven't done that. Just want to have a conversation with you. Do you understand why it's important to capture the apex of the x-ray? She may not even understand that.
I would say they don't.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the first question I'm asking. Like, no judgment here. I just want to make sure you understand why it's so important. They're either going to say yes or no. Okay. If they say yes, my next question is, awesome, perfect. If you understand why, but you're still not doing it, do you need my help to get you trained up to do it on a routine basis? Right? Yes or no. So these are some of the questions that we're having. And in anticipation of these peer-to-peer into the moment minute meetings, we've all kind of given each other permission at a team meeting or something like, guys, and you reference what you just said. If it was my organization or like you, I would be like, guys, I can no longer manage you coming to me and then me going to you and then this person going to, like, it just doesn't work. It takes too long. It's full of friction and nobody's getting better. So we all need to make sure that we're giving each other permission from a position of empathy and curiosity to have these conversations, right? That's the first part. Yes, I give you permission. And then the next thing we're constantly talking about is when you're the receiver of that information, that conversation, you're not adversarial. You're not confrontational. You're going to be an active listener. So you're not thinking about what your response is going to be while the other person's talking. We've had lots of conversations that say that there's no such thing as multitasking. So if someone's talking to you and you're formulating the response in your head as they're talking, that means you're not truly listening to them. So just hear what they have to say, process it. It could take a couple seconds and then formulate your response, right? But again, we're not attacking you. We're just trying to gain some clarity on why this is occurring, because what's occurring right now is not helping us win. So that's how those conversations are. And then I always try to communicate to the team who benefits when this conversation is not had. So let's use your associate example.
Yeah.
Let's say he sweeps it under the rug, right? So who's benefiting from that? And I go through the whole process. Like, is the assistant benefiting from that? Hell no, because they're not getting any better and they don't have clarity on why the apex of that x-ray needs to be covered, right? Is the patient benefiting at all? No, because we don't even know if the endo ended up good or not. Is the business benefiting at all? No, because now we have x-rays taken that are not of diagnostic value. Arguably, the only person that benefits in this situation is this associate, because they didn't have to develop the courage to go have this growth conversation with this assistant. And I would argue that that's selfish. So if our goal is to grow people around us, to identify where there's some shortcomings and coach them up, make them 1% better, then we all need to develop the courage to go into the storm and have these conversations. And I also share with them, just like playing guitar, just like playing piano, if you have no experience doing this, the first time you do it, it's going to be so awkward. It's just going to feel weird. It's a skill. It's a learned and acquired ability. So the second, the third, the fourth time you do this, it's going to feel so much more comfortable. And if we're all on the same page, then the person on the receiving end is going to be like, thank you. thank you for letting me know that because I thought the x-rays I was taking were good. Or thank you for letting me know that you need to see the apex because I had no idea why we were even taking this x-ray. Like, it's just, again, going to rule number 2. They're just, all errors are errors of understanding.
Yeah, it's so true, man. I would say the associate is not having a benefit because they're sitting there looking at the taper of the root and the taper of the file, and they're going, that root looks like maybe another 2 millimeters. That file looks like it probably goes a little. Should I get this retaken or can I just guesstimate on what it looks like?
But why would you do that?
Because I don't want to talk to her.
Exactly. She doesn't deserve to know if she's doing a good job or not. Like, what are you even talking about?
I know. It's so true. Let's rewind a little bit. I love that whole thing we went through there because honestly, I mean, not only at work for your employees that can do this skill effectively, I mean, this translates to relationships with their spouses, with their kids. I mean, this is something, these are life skills of ultra successful people that can address conflict constructively. Earlier, you said leaning on the core values and the mission statement. And I know most docs have a mission statement. I don't know if all docs have core value statements, but as far as I'm concerned, what I see is that these are created, they're shoved in a drawer or left on a Word file, and they're never brought up again. They're never really communicated or vocalized to the team on any sort of regular basis. So if they've done these documents, or maybe they're going to do them, what do you do with these things and how do you lean on these so that it affects the culture of your team members?
Yeah, I agree with you. And unfortunately, I do see that a lot. A couple things. So first off, I think core values can be very, very different from practice to practice. And it just gives so much clarity on what you are looking for in your employees. And we talk about core values from the initial interview. We actually try to scare people out of joining us because we're so adamant about our core values. So first thing you need to do is have core values. And we can talk about how to ultimately do that. I think the second thing you need to do is define them. And we have each core value defined via a 3 or 4 sentence paragraph. Because, for example, one of our core values is humility. Well, humility can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So I want to define humility. So when I'm having an uncomfortable conversation, maybe at a performance review or a monthly one-on-one, and I tell someone that they're struggling with their humility, we can unpack the definition and they say, okay, I understand now based on this definition where you want me to improve from the behavior of humility. So I think, first of all, having them. Second of all, making sure they're extremely well defined. And then as far as your question about when do they get broken out, we talk about them at every one-on-one. We talk about them at every performance review. We talk about them at every quarterly meeting. Even in morning meetings, which are daily, just to keep the core values top of mind, we'll have each team leader, office manager, whoever's running that morning meeting, bring up one of the core values as part of the morning meeting agenda and basically say, okay, one of our core values is team player. So the office manager will choose someone and say, hey, Mary, I need you to share with the group here an example of how one of our employees exhibited the core value of team player this week. And then they just quiet, right? So that everyone's nervous, and then they ultimately come up with, well, a couple of days ago, I was in the weeds. I was a half hour behind in my appointment. My doctor was struggling to take a tooth out. And I noticed the rest of the assistants stocked my room, took out my garbage, mopped the floor, because otherwise I would have had to stay even later to do that. So the rest of the assistant team on Tuesday exhibited how they're all team players. Like, perfect. So it just keeps it top of mind. So there's lots of tools that you can use. Make sure you have them. Make sure they're well defined. Use them at all of the weekly, monthly performance reviews. And then I do think it's a great idea to at least use one at morning meetings. It takes 60 seconds of your morning meeting huddle, and it keeps everything top of mind.
Yeah, love it, man. So if we had to zoom out a little bit, you've had a lot of experience in the dental industry, managing a lot of people. Now you're managing way more people. What would you say if somebody's like, I got a pretty decent flagship, I'm thinking about multi-practice. What would you say? Multi-practice is for somebody who, and multi-practice is not for you, if this. What would you say from your experience, the differences between one and multiple practices?
It's a lot, man. I think the whole mindset has shifted, right? So I don't want to bring up anyone, but it seems like with the breakaway seminars 20 years ago, the leader of that had this mindset. He taught this. I was at his second ever seminar, and he taught that your multiple is directly related to how many locations you have. And he would preach from the stage that your EBITDA doesn't have to increase. You could have a flagship that's doing 500 grand in EBITDA. And even if your second and third and fourth location break even, the fact that you have a second and third and fourth location, it's just going to increase the multiple, to 6x, 8x, 10x. And that's what we were hearing. And the reality is that obviously is not true, right? So at the end of the day, the most important thing, if we're talking about just dollars and cents, is total EBITDA. And if you can maximize EBITDA under one roof, that's what I would do first and foremost. If you're at capacity in that one flagship and you can't expand anymore and you still want to grow, then yeah, multiple locations could be something to entertain. It comes with just an entirely new level of complexity. So I would not encourage that unless it aligns with what you want out of life, what your vision is, like what your revenue goals are, how much money you need to take home to support the lifestyle that you want to give your family, and all of those things. But if we're talking about $10 million in yearly revenue in one location, or $10 million in yearly revenue over 5 locations that are doing $2 million apiece, I will take the one location, $10 million office 7 days a week and twice on Sunday. It's just so much easier to manage than multiple locations.
Yeah, that's great information, man. So last thing I'd like to explore with you is your decision to stop doing clinical 2 days a week. I know you did 2 days a week for a number of years. If you could just talk about that decision, what led to it, and just how you're feeling about it right now.
Yeah, I miss it sometimes. The reason that I fully phased out was this concept of delegation, right? So we talk about office managers needing to delegate treatment follow-up or different levels of delegation throughout the organization. Well, I finally came to the realization that I needed to delegate clinical dentistry because some of the things that I'm really good at in a non-clinical sense are things that only I'm really good at. Now, again, that sounds like a lot of ego, but the reality is, for example, mentoring young doctors, trying to have collaborative conversations amongst leadership, brainstorming with people on my leadership team about how we can become better. I felt like I'm really good at that. And I wasn't able to go all in and do that all week when I was at the chair. And 10 years ago, my ego would say that I'm really, really good at the chair and I'm not going to delegate that responsibility. But the reality is, as I brought on more associates and as I got amazed at how good they were clinically, I felt more and more comfortable delegating that responsibility to them and then me zoning in on a couple skills that I think I'm exceptionally good at. That's the main reason I did it. I love going into the operatory and mentoring up docs, doing implants, doing ortho, doing surgery. I love interviewing docs. I love trying to get into a team meeting where they're having a morale or cultural issue and identifying that and helping them get through that. And I just feel like out of everyone in our organization, I'm the best person to do that. I'm no longer the best person to do molar endo, to take out wisdom teeth. I've been lucky enough to have people that are really, really good at that, and they can take on those tasks, and I'll take on tasks that I think I'm exceptionally good at. And I feel like that's helping us continue to get to the next level. This year, we're going to have our highest amount of revenue, our highest amount of profitability, and I have not contributed $1 to production. So that tells me that things are trending in the right direction. I'm in the seat that I'm supposed to be in, and my 20 other docs are in the seats that they're supposed to be in.
It's interesting as I'm considering going multi-practice just for fulfillment, things to do. I love the people part. I can't say I love the clinical part that much anymore. I still do. I'm doing more only ortho. But I told my assistant the other day, I'm like, what do you think about me closing my ortho? We'll just stop doing starts. We'll finish off these last cases over the next 2 years and we'll just do something else. And she said, yeah, I think that's awesome. I'd love to, because she's also my clinical lead and my main manager. She's the me when I'm not there. It was funny because it just brings up the perspective thing. As I said, I don't even think this is even worth it. What do I do? Like $300K a year here? And she goes, oh, must be nice to only make $300K a year. And I said, no. I mean, like, I actually just do $300K in production in this large office. I don't think it's a little blip on the big like production scale. But damn, right. I went home and I'm like, well, I'm glad we clarified that, because she would have went home and said I was complaining about making $300K a year. And
Yeah. Goes
so.
back to rule number 2.
Yeah.
All errors are errors in understanding. So if you didn't clear that up, then she's telling everyone in her network,
Yes.
like, I work for this ass. She's like complaining about making $300,000 a year.
Yeah. I know, totally. But like, I'm feeling the same thing. And I wonder if you could say that you felt the same, is that I'm not loving clinical that much, but I am loving and enjoying the people part. So as an owner of a big practice that has the flexibility, I feel like I personally want to shift into that more. And if that requires me to open more practices to be needed in that sense, that's what I think I want to do. Did you also have a similar experience with the clinical where you're just like, I'm not loving this as much as I'm loving leading my team?
Yeah, 100%. No question. Now, you'll miss aspects of clinical dentistry for sure, just like I miss aspects of clinical dentistry. But you have such a level of emotional intelligence and self-awareness and your ability to communicate with other people. Like, it's such a unique skill that it's worth way more, to put a dollars and cents perspective on it. It's worth way more for you to grow people, grow leaders, grow doctors, and then exponentially you'll have a bigger impact on them than you ever could have by bending wires and putting attachments on, like yourself. Like, it just comes down, again, and I wouldn't say that to everybody, because there are some people out there that should stay in the treatment room and just do really good clinical dentistry. But with your level of emotional intelligence, like you could create such a sphere of influence on other people, other offices, other communities, that if you have that itch, then 100% I would encourage you to pursue it. Now, again, just based on my experience, it's going to be hard. But go back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, like, I just want to feel a sense of fulfillment. Like, I don't want to just play golf all day, every day, or sit at the beach and have drinks and read books. Like, I'm sure that's cool for a couple weeks here, a couple weeks there, but I just need to feel a sense of purpose when I get out of bed. And I really feel like what I do on a daily basis now makes a difference.
Yeah, I love that, man. That's awesome. Well, talk about Dental Lighthouse and what you're doing there. You just kicked that thing off. That's running. I listened to a few episodes, man. Great stuff. Like, tell the listeners about Dental Lighthouse.
So I don't have an original idea in my head. So basically, the Dental Lighthouse is a copy of Dave Ramsey's podcast. He's got a weekly podcast called Entre Leadership, where basically people just call in. And when I say people, I mean like not like real prominent, like nationally known people. It's like a guy that owns like a 2-location HVAC business in Lincoln, Nebraska. And then there's a chiropractor in Florida. And then there's an IT guy in Iowa. They just call the podcast and they just ask real questions. I have this person that's struggling here, or what should I do about revenue? And I just love the podcast, and I would encourage all dentists to listen to it. But I just had the idea of like, you know what, if I could do something like this in the world of dentistry, I really think it could resonate with a lot of people. So that's basically what we did. We developed a pipeline of people calling in, emailing in, texting in their problems, and I try to answer them on the air to the best of my ability. The content's really resonated with people because it's kind of like real world stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, I love podcasts that interview key opinion leaders and stuff like that, but I really love when someone calls in and says, I'm struggling to get my assistant to follow the end of day checklist. How would you handle that? Like, that's real stuff, right? Like, that's what we're all dealing with at some point in our career. So be able to share some wisdom with that person and to have multiple people hear it. That's kind of what the Dental Lighthouse podcast is all about. Hearing from normal, everyday dentists like me, like you, and some of the issues that they're dealing with and helping them try to navigate it.
It's interesting because you mentioned that one example is that, I mean, we were talking about the peer-to-peer stuff. If you could nail that at your practice, someone could come to you or me and be like, I got this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem, all these problems. And if you could just nail the peer-to-peer thing and the culture thing and just handling those conversations, it's almost like all those other problems you were trying to fix just will fix themselves. And I hate this, and the listeners probably getting sick of me saying it, is that I will title this episode, I won't put leadership in this episode, because if I do, no one's going to listen. I'm going to start saying, like, everywhere I want to put leadership, I'm just going to start putting profit. Like Jason Tenori on creating profit at his group.
Maximize your take-home pay, which is a ultimate side effect of great leadership.
You know what? That's going to be the episode. And now, if the listener, if you made it this far into the episode, now you know how I pulled that switcheroo. It's maximum. I love it. That's great, man. So where can they hear your podcast? Where do you have a website? Do you have anywhere else that listeners can reach out to find you at?
Yeah, we're on all the podcast platforms. And then there's a lot of information on our website, dentallighthouse.com. My email, my cell phone's right up on there. And it's my real number. I love receiving text messages from associate dentists and dental hygienists and office managers bitching about their owner doc. And I just try to coach them through it. It also leads to great podcast episodes when they tell me their problems, and I just try to unpack them on the air. So yeah, if anyone out there listening has things that they want to run by me or get on the podcast, then dentallighthouse.com is the best place to start looking.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you are the 9% of Android listeners of the Dental Practice Heroes podcast, don't even waste your time because it's not going to work.
Yeah, we just don't even bother.
Did you update your iPhone? Did you get that? Because we can talk now.
No.
Oh, we can send pictures. We can send videos. You can put me in a group chat.
What? Yeah. Are you serious?
Yeah, the new iOS update that came out last Monday.
No, I think I still have the 6. I don't think the iPhone 6 can do all that.
What are they on now?
No, I have no idea. I think this is a 12. But
That's a
I'm not
Razor.
sure what it is.
He's got a Motorola Razor, everybody. All right, dude, Jason, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Always fun. So much knowledge and wisdom that you've got. And I know listeners really like this episode. And I'm sure that everyone's got to the end of this. And we were talking about profit the whole time, everybody. That's what we were talking about. So thanks so much, dude.
All right, brother. Great talking to you.
Thank you. That wraps up another episode of the Dental Lighthouse podcast. You have a choice today. Choose to be a lighthouse. Lighthouses are powerful and steadfast. They are beacons of light for others to reference when life gets turbulent. Go out into the world today and become a lighthouse for someone. Give more than you get. True joy comes from serving others. Start today. I'm Jason Tenori, your host. Thank you for listening to the Dental Lighthouse podcast. For more information, podcast show notes, or links to anything that we have discussed today, please check out our website, thedentallighthouse.com. We would love to hear from you. If you would like to get on the show, please email us at podcast@thedentallighthouse.com.